My name is Maya Chen, and at 24 years old, I learned that sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones who see you the least. What started as a family vacation to celebrate my older sister's engagement turned into 7 days of humiliation that would change everything between us forever. They made me sleep on a pullout couch in the resort lobby for 3 nights, treating me like I was lucky to even be there. What they didn't know was that I was the one who had quietly paid for the entire $15,000 luxury resort stay. If you want to know what happened when they finally discovered the truth, and how it completely shattered their perception of me, stay tuned. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up as the youngest of 3 daughters in the Chen family meant I was perpetually seen as the baby, the one who needed protection, guidance, and most frustratingly, financial support from everyone else. My parents, David and Linda Chen, had built a successful chain of medical supply stores across Northern California, and my sisters had followed perfectly in their entrepreneurial footsteps. Jessica, 29, had just launched her 3rd boutique clothing store and gotten engaged to a prominent real estate developer. Rachel, 27, was a rising marketing executive at a tech company in Silicon Valley with a salary that made our parents beam with pride. Then there was me, Maya, the art therapy graduate student who worked part-time at a children's hospital and lived in a tiny studio apartment that my family constantly worried about. What they didn't know, and what I had carefully kept hidden for 2 years, was that I had been quietly building something extraordinary. During my undergraduate years studying psychology and fine arts, I had started creating digital art and selling it online as a side hobby. What began as simple illustrations for small businesses had evolved into something I never expected. My breakthrough came when a popular meditation app discovered my work and commissioned me to create their entire visual brand identity. That single contract had led to a cascade of high-profile clients, including tech startups, wellness brands, and even a few celebrities who wanted custom digital art for their social media presence. While my family saw me struggling to pay rent and eating ramen noodles, I was actually building a substantial savings account and investment portfolio that I managed entirely online. The decision to keep my financial success private hadn't been malicious initially. I was genuinely unsure if the income would continue, and I wanted to prove to myself that I could sustain it before making any announcements. But as months turned into years, and my earnings grew from thousands to 6 figures annually, the secret became more complex. I had witnessed how differently my family treated Jessica and Rachel once they became financially successful. The respect, the inclusion in major decisions, the assumption that their opinions mattered more because they had proven themselves capable. I wasn't ready for that dynamic to shift, partly because I was afraid they would see my success as luck rather than skill, and partly because I was curious to see how they truly viewed me when they thought I was financially dependent on their goodwill. That curiosity would prove to be both enlightening and heartbreaking. The vacation to Maui had been planned to celebrate Jessica's engagement to Brandon, a man who owned several commercial properties and had proposed with a ring that cost more than most people's cars. The original plan involved staying at a mid-range hotel and splitting the costs among everyone, but as the planning progressed, Jessica kept upgrading the expectations. She wanted to stay at the Grand Wailea Resort, one of the most luxurious properties on the island, with oceanfront suites and access to exclusive amenities. When my father calculated the costs and announced that each family would need to contribute $5,000 for accommodations alone, not including flights or activities, I watched the dynamic shift immediately. My parents and sisters began discussing who could afford what, with subtle implications that I would need the most financial assistance. Jessica suggested that perhaps I could stay at a nearby budget hotel and just visit during the day. Rachel offered to let me sleep on a cot in her room if I could contribute $1,000 toward her share. The conversation was having this surreal quality where they were talking about me as if I wasn't sitting right there at my parents' dining room table. My mother kept giving me sympathetic looks while explaining to Jessica that they would cover my portion because they didn't want me to feel excluded from such an important family celebration. The pity in her voice was almost unbearable, but it also crystallized something for me. I realized this was my opportunity to do something generous for my family, while also observing how they treated someone they perceived as financially inferior. Without saying anything during that dinner, I went home and made a decision that would change everything. I called the resort directly and booked the presidential suite, along with 2 additional oceanfront suites for 7 nights. The total cost was just over $15,000, which I paid immediately using my business account. Then I called my father and told him I had managed to secure a significant group discount through a contact I had made during my part-time work at the hospital. I explained that I had booked upgraded accommodations for everyone and that the total cost per family was now only $2,000, which I knew was much more manageable for everyone's budgets. The relief and excitement in his voice was immediate, and within hours the entire family was buzzing about the amazing deal I had somehow negotiated. What I didn't anticipate was how that lie would set up an expectation that I was still the family member who needed to be managed and directed, even when I was ostensibly contributing to the solution. In their minds, I had gotten lucky with a connection, not demonstrated any particular competence or capability. This perception would color every interaction during the trip in ways I hadn't fully considered. The flight to Maui was my first real preview of what the week would be like. Despite the fact that I had secretly paid for everyone's upgraded accommodations, I was still treated as the tag-along little sister who should be grateful for the opportunity to join such an expensive family vacation. Jessica spent the entire 5-hour flight discussing wedding plans with Rachel and my mother, occasionally including me, by asking if I thought I could handle photographing some of the casual events, since I was artistic, and they wanted to save money on a professional photographer. Brandon, Jessica's fiancé, was polite but distant, clearly seeing me as Jessica's quirky younger sister who didn't quite fit into their world of business networking and investment discussions. When he asked what I did for work, I gave my standard answer about being a graduate student in art therapy. His response was a polite nod and an immediate pivot to asking Rachel about her latest marketing campaign for a startup that had just secured Series B funding. My father spent most of the flight reading business magazines and taking calls about the medical supply stores, periodically checking on me to make sure I had enough money for meals and activities once we arrived. Each time he asked, I felt a mix of gratitude for his concern and frustration at being perceived as someone who couldn't take care of herself. My mother kept offering me snacks she had packed and asking if I was nervous about staying at such a fancy resort, as if luxury accommodations were something I had never experienced. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was probably the only person on that plane who had actually stayed at resorts of this caliber before. My business success had allowed me to travel extensively over the past 2 years, always quietly and never posting about it on social media where my family might see. I had stayed at 5-star properties in Tokyo.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Paris and New York, for both business meetings and personal enjoyment. But to my family, I was the sister who shopped at thrift stores and took the bus to save money. When we arrived at the Grand Wailea, even I was impressed by the expansive property with its cascading pools, pristine beaches, and impeccable landscaping. The resort stretched along a beautiful section of Wailea Beach, with multiple towers connected by winding pathways through tropical gardens. As we approached the front desk, I felt a nervous excitement about how this week would unfold, still believing that the vacation would ultimately bring us closer together. The check-in process was when the first real tensions emerged. The resort staff, seeing our reservation details, immediately treated our group with the elevated service reserved for their highest-tier guests. We were offered complimentary champagne, expedited luggage service, and a personal concierge to help coordinate activities. The presidential suite I had booked came with exclusive access to a private beach area and a dedicated butler service. Jessica was absolutely radiant as the staff explained the amenities, clearly feeling that this level of luxury was exactly what she deserved for her engagement celebration. Brandon looked impressed, but not surprised, as if he was accustomed to this kind of treatment. Rachel was taking photos of everything for her social media, already crafting the narrative of our amazing family vacation. My parents seemed slightly overwhelmed by the opulence, but were trying to appear sophisticated and comfortable. My father kept mentioning to the staff how grateful we were for the group discount that had made this possible, while my mother worried quietly about appropriate tipping protocols for all the additional services. As the concierge explained the layout of our accommodations, I realized there had been a miscommunication somewhere in the booking process. The presidential suite had 3 bedrooms, which I had assumed would house my parents, Jessica and Brandon and Rachel. The two additional oceanfront suites were supposed to provide extra space and privacy for everyone. But the concierge was explaining that one of the oceanfront suites had been configured as a single king bedroom for the engaged couple, while the other had been set up with twin beds, apparently for Rachel and me to share. Jessica immediately spoke up, explaining that she and Brandon would need their own private suite for the week, which was perfectly reasonable. Rachel then mentioned that she had been looking forward to having her own space to work remotely some evenings and take business calls without disturbing anyone. This left the question of where I would stay, and the assumption seemed to be that I would take the fold-out couch in the main living area of the presidential suite. "Maya won't mind the couch," my mother said with a smile, as if she was being generous in offering me accommodation in the suite's common area. "She's used to small spaces from that tiny apartment, and this way she can still be part of everything." The concierge looked uncomfortable, clearly not accustomed to guests making sleeping arrangements that involved luxury suite couches. But my family seemed to think this was a perfectly reasonable solution, and I found myself once again speechless in the face of their casual dismissal of my comfort and privacy. What made the situation more surreal was that I could have easily upgraded everyone's accommodations further, or booked additional rooms with a single phone call. The money wasn't an issue for me, but the principle of the matter was becoming clear. Even when I was the one who had made this luxury vacation possible, I was still the family member whose needs came last. That first evening set the tone for everything that would follow. We had dinner at the resort's signature restaurant, a stunning oceanfront location, with tables positioned to catch the sunset over the Pacific. The menu featured fresh local seafood and innovative fusion cuisine that normally would have excited me. But I found myself distracted by the ongoing family dynamic that seemed to position me as the grateful recipient of everyone else's largesse. Jessica spent the meal talking about wedding venues and her vision for the reception, with Brandon occasionally adding comments about the business networking opportunities such events provided. Rachel shared updates about her work projects and the possibility of a promotion that would come with a significant salary increase. My parents asked thoughtful questions and offered advice, clearly proud of their accomplished daughters. When the conversation turned to me, the questions were different. My mother asked if graduate school was going well and whether I was managing to keep up with the costs. My father wondered if I had given any more thought to pursuing a more stable career path, perhaps something in healthcare administration that would provide better financial security. I answered their questions honestly, but found myself editing my responses to match their expectations. I didn't mention that I had been invited to speak at a digital art conference in Los Angeles the following month, or that I had recently been commissioned to create artwork for a major wellness brand's national advertising campaign. Instead, I talked about my classes and my part-time work at the Children's Hospital, reinforcing their perception of me as someone still figuring out her life. The evening ended with plans for the next day's activities, which had been researched and organized primarily by Jessica and Rachel. They had booked snorkeling excursions, spa treatments, and dinner reservations at exclusive restaurants. Each activity came with a cost breakdown and an assumption about how expenses would be shared. As we returned to our accommodations, I realized that my family had somehow managed to take my secret generosity and transform it into another opportunity to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy. I was grateful to be included, expected to be flexible about my comfort, and assumed to need financial assistance with any additional expenses. That night, as I lay on the fold-out couch in the main living area of the presidential suite, listening to my parents discussing wedding plans in their bedroom and Jessica and Brandon laughing in the distance from their private suite, I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. The sliding glass doors overlooked the ocean, and the sound of waves should have been soothing. Instead, I felt more alone and invisible than I had in years. The resort staff had left fresh flowers and a fruit basket in the suite, along with a personalized welcome note thanking us for choosing the Grand Wailea for our family celebration. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was reading a thank you note for my own generosity while sleeping on a couch, because my family couldn't imagine that I might deserve better accommodations. The second day began early when the housekeeping staff arrived to clean the suite. I was still asleep on the fold-out couch when they knocked, and I had to quickly gather my belongings and get dressed in the bathroom while they worked around me. My mother emerged from the master bedroom looking embarrassed that I had been caught in such an awkward situation. But her solution was to suggest that I might want to wake up earlier in the future to avoid similar inconveniences. At breakfast, served on the resort's oceanfront terrace, the family discussed the day's planned activities with enthusiasm. Rachel had arranged for a private snorkeling trip that would take us to some of the best coral reefs around Maui. The cost was $200 per person, and there was an automatic assumption that my parents would cover my portion along with their own. I sat quietly eating tropical fruit and fresh pastries while listening to my family make financial decisions on my behalf. The conversation had this surreal quality where they discussed my participation in expensive activities as if I was a child who needed permission and financial assistance, rather than an adult capable of making my own choices. Jessica mentioned that she wanted to book couples massages at the spa for herself, and Brandon, followed by Rachel, who thought it would be nice to have mother-daughter spa treatments with our mom. This left me as the odd person out once again, with my father joking that he and I could sit by the pool and read books while the ladies enjoyed their pampering sessions. The snorkeling trip was beautiful, with crystal clear water and vibrant marine life that would have been amazing to experience under different circumstances. But I found myself increasingly aware of how my family interacted with me compared to each other. When I pointed out a sea turtle to everyone, Jessica barely glanced over before returning to her conversation with Brandon about honeymoon destinations. When I tried to share my enthusiasm about the coral formations we were seeing, Rachel was busy taking selfies for her social media. My parents were kind and included me in their conversations, but there was a subtle quality of caretaking in their attention that reminded me constantly of my perceived status as the family member who needed looking after. When I mentioned that I was thinking about getting certified for scuba diving, my father immediately launched into a lecture about the costs and risks involved, as if I hadn't already researched both extensively. That evening, as we prepared for dinner at one of Maui's most exclusive restaurants, the accommodation situation became even more uncomfortable. I had spent the afternoon sitting by the pool, while my mother and sisters enjoyed their spa treatments, reading a book, and trying to look content. But the reality was that I felt increasingly isolated from my own family vacation. When I returned to the presidential suite to get ready for dinner, I discovered that my belongings had been moved to make room for Jessica's wedding dress, which she had brought along for photos on the beach. My clothes were now piled on a chair in the corner, while her dress took up the entire fold-out couch area. "I hope you don't mind," Jessica said as she emerged from the master bedroom. "I wanted to steam out the wrinkles, and this seemed like the best space for it. You can just move your stuff wherever you need it." The casual dismissal in her tone was what finally broke something inside me. For 2 days, I had been treated as an afterthought in accommodations that I had secretly paid for, by family members who claimed to love me but seemed incapable of seeing me as an equal adult deserving of basic respect and consideration. As I stood there looking at my belongings relegated to a corner while my sister's dress commanded the only sleeping space I had been allocated, I realized that my experiment in generosity had revealed something painful but important about my family dynamics. They didn't just see me as financially inferior, they saw me as less deserving of comfort, privacy, and consideration in general. That night at dinner, as my family celebrated Jessica's engagement with expensive wine and elaborate toasts, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being invisible, done being grateful for scraps of attention and accommodation, and done pretending that their treatment of me was acceptable just because it came wrapped in expressions of love and concern. The restaurant was stunning, perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean with views that stretched to the horizon. Under different circumstances, it would have been a perfect setting for a family celebration. But as I sat at the table listening to speech after speech about Jessica's accomplishments and bright future, I felt a growing resolve to stop hiding who I had become. When my father raised his glass to toast the amazing family vacation that had been made possible by my lucky connection at the hospital, I realized that the moment of truth was approaching faster than I had anticipated. The lie I had told to cover my generosity was about to become unsustainable, and I was no longer sure I wanted to sustain it anyway. As we returned to the resort that night, I knew that the remaining days of our vacation would either bring my family closer together through honesty or drive us apart through the revelation of how they had treated me when they thought I was powerless to change my circumstances. Either way, I was ready for them to see who I really was, even if it meant shattering their comfortable assumptions about the baby sister who needed their protection and pity. The third day would bring the beginning of the end of my secret, though none of us knew it yet. The third morning brought an incident that would push me to my breaking point. I woke up on the couch to find my laptop bag soaking wet from a spilled drink that someone had left on the coffee table overnight. My heart stopped as I frantically checked my equipment, discovering that condensation had seeped into my MacBook Pro, the same computer that contained all my current client projects and served as the primary tool for my six-figure digital art business. "Oh no, Maya, I'm so sorry," Rachel said as she emerged from her suite, noticing my distress. "I set my cocktail down there last night and must have forgotten about it. But don't worry, I'm sure your school computer can be replaced pretty easily, right? Those student laptops aren't usually too expensive." Her assumption that I owned some cheap student laptop rather than professional equipment worth thousands of dollars was infuriating, but what made it worse was her immediate dismissal of the problem. She suggested I could use her computer if I needed to check email, as if my work consisted of nothing more than casual correspondence. My father overheard the conversation and approached with his wallet already out. "How much do you think it will cost to fix, honey? I can give you a few $100s to take it to a repair shop when we get home." His generous offer was made with the kindness I had come to expect from him, but it also reflected his complete misunderstanding of what I had lost. The laptop contained artwork for 3 major clients with deadlines the following week, project files worth over $50,000 in contracted work, and portfolio pieces that had taken months to create. But I couldn't explain any of this without revealing the truth about my business, so I simply thanked him and said I would handle it. Jessica, overhearing our conversation while getting ready for another spa appointment, called out from the bedroom, "Maya, this is exactly why you need to be more careful with your things. When you're staying in fancy places like this, you have to think about protecting your belongings. Maybe this will be a good lesson about responsibility." The condescending tone in her voice, combined with the fact that my laptop had been damaged because I was sleeping in a common area instead of having my own secure room, finally broke through my determination to maintain peace. I excused myself and walked out to the private beach area that came with our presidential suite, needing space to think and calm down before I said something I might regret. The beach was pristine and nearly empty in the early morning, with gentle waves lapping against white sand. Under normal circumstances, it would have been exactly the kind of peaceful setting I loved for reflection and creativity. But as I sat on one of the luxury loungers that came with our suite access, I felt nothing but frustration and isolation. I called my business insurance company to report the laptop damage, using the secure Wi-Fi that came with our premium accommodations. During the call, I had to provide my business information and income verification, speaking in hushed tones about contracts and revenue figures that would have shocked my family if they had overheard. The insurance representative assured me that my equipment would be covered, but the inconvenience and potential delays to my client work were still significant concerns. When I returned to the suite, I found my family gathered around the dining table that overlooked the ocean, planning the day's activities with characteristic enthusiasm. They had ordered room service breakfast, an elaborate spread of fresh fruit, pastries, and gourmet coffee that probably cost more than many people spent on groceries in a week. "There she is," my mother said warmly as I joined them. "We were just discussing the helicopter tour this afternoon. $300 per person, but the views are supposed to be absolutely incredible. Your father and I will cover your portion, of course." The automatic assumption that I needed financial assistance was becoming more grating with each incident. I had reached a point where their generosity felt less like kindness, and more like a constant reminder of how they perceived my capabilities and status within the family. Brandon, who had been relatively quiet during most family interactions, chose that moment to engage me in conversation. "Maya, Jessica mentioned you do some kind of art therapy work. That must be really rewarding, helping kids and all. Do you think you'll eventually move into something more financially stable, or are you planning to stick with the nonprofit world?" His question was phrased politely, but the underlying assumption was clear. He saw my work as admirable but impractical, the kind of career choice that idealistic young people made before reality forced them into more pragmatic decisions. Jessica nodded along with his question, clearly having discussed my career prospects with him in private. Art therapy is actually a growing field with good earning potential, I replied carefully. There are opportunities in private practice, hospitals, and corporate wellness programs that can be quite lucrative. Rachel looked up from her phone, where she had been checking her work emails. But you're still in school, right? So you're not really earning anything substantial yet. It's going to be years before you can build up a real practice and start making decent money. The conversation was heading in a direction that would either force me to lie or reveal information I wasn't ready to share. I deflected by asking about their plans for the helicopter tour, hoping to shift the focus away from my financial situation. The helicopter tour itself was magnificent, offering breathtaking views of Maui's volcanic landscapes, hidden waterfalls, and pristine coastlines. We flew over the road to Hana, circled the summit of Haleakala, and saw parts of the island that were accessible only from the air. The pilot was knowledgeable and entertaining, pointing out geological features and sharing stories about Hawaiian history and culture. But even during this incredible experience, I found myself feeling disconnected from my family's enjoyment. Jessica and Brandon sat together in the front seats, taking couple photos against the stunning backdrop. Rachel positioned herself for the best social media shots, already crafting captions about living her best life. My parents held hands and marveled at the scenery, with the wonder of people experiencing something completely new. I was relegated to the back corner seat, taking my own photos but having no one to share the experience with in real time. When I pointed out a particularly beautiful waterfall cascading down a emerald cliff face, my enthusiasm was met with polite acknowledgement before the conversation returned to wedding planning or work achievements. During the flight, the pilot mentioned that helicopter tours were one of the most popular activities for guests staying at the luxury resorts, and that the Grand Wailea package we had booked included several exclusive experiences that weren't available to regular tourists. His comment reminded me once again that I was the one who had made this entire vacation possible, yet I was being treated as the family member who should be most grateful for the opportunity to participate. That evening brought what would become the most humiliating incident of the entire trip. We had dinner reservations at Mama's Fish House, a legendary restaurant known for its fresh seafood and oceanfront location. The restaurant required advance reservations and was considered one of the must-visit culinary experiences on Maui. As we were getting ready, I discovered that my only dress appropriate for such an upscale restaurant had been damaged when my belongings were moved to accommodate Jessica's wedding dress. A makeup stain had somehow transferred onto the fabric, leaving a noticeable mark across the front. When I mentioned this to my family, the response was swift and decisive. Jessica offered to loan me something from her wardrobe, but her clothes were several sizes too small for me. Rachel suggested I could wear casual clothes, since the restaurant would probably understand that I wasn't used to such formal dining establishments. My mother came up with what she thought was a helpful solution. "Maya, honey, why don't you just stay here tonight? You can order room service and relax by the pool. Sometimes it's nice to have a quiet evening, and honestly, Mama's Fish House is quite expensive. We're already spending so much on this vacation." The suggestion that I skip the dinner because of clothing issues and cost concerns was presented as consideration for my comfort and finances. But the underlying message was clear. When inconveniences arose, I was the family member who could be excluded from important experiences. "Actually," my father added, trying to be helpful, "this might work out well. Maya can have some alone time, and we can use this dinner to discuss some of the wedding planning details that might be boring for her anyway." The casual dismissal of my interest in my own sister's wedding plans stung more than I had expected. I was being written out of a family experience, not because I had done anything wrong, but because solving the problem of my damaged dress was less important than maintaining everyone else's plans. I agreed to stay behind, partly because I was exhausted from days of feeling like an outsider, and partly because I wanted to see how they would behave when they thought I couldn't witness their interactions. As they left for dinner, dressed beautifully and excited about their evening, I felt more alone than I had since arriving in Maui. The resort's room service menu was extensive and luxurious, offering everything from fresh sushi to gourmet steaks. I ordered a simple meal and ate it on the private balcony of the presidential suite, watching the sunset over the Pacific Ocean. The view was spectacular, the kind of scene that people traveled thousands of miles to experience, but I couldn't enjoy it fully knowing that my family was at dinner discussing wedding plans without me. While they were gone, I decided to explore more of the resort's exclusive amenities that came with our suite. The presidential suite included access to a private pool area, a dedicated concierge service, and a butler who could arrange special experiences. As I walked through these luxurious spaces, I was struck by the irony that I was experiencing the resort's best offerings alone while my family enjoyed a group dinner that I had been excluded from. The concierge, a kind woman named Leilani, who had been particularly attentive to our group, noticed me enjoying the private pool area by myself. She approached with genuine concern, asking if everything was all right with my accommodations. "Your family mentioned you might be feeling a bit overwhelmed by all the luxury," she said gently. "If there's anything we can do to make you more comfortable, please let us know. The presidential suite is designed for relaxation and enjoyment." Her comment revealed that my family had been discussing my supposed discomfort with the resort's amenities, painting me as someone who was out of place in such luxurious surroundings, rather than someone who deserved to be treated with equal consideration. I assured Leilani that everything was fine, but her concern highlighted how my family's treatment of me was noticeable even to resort staff who were trained to be discreet and professional. The fact that they had felt the need to explain my behavior to the concierge suggested that my exclusion from family activities had been more obvious than I realized. When my family returned from dinner several hours later, they were in high spirits, talking enthusiastically about the incredible meal and the restaurant's romantic atmosphere. Jessica showed me photos of their food and the sunset view from their table, describing each dish in detail as if I had asked for a complete report. "You really didn't miss anything too exciting," Rachel said, though her enthusiasm while describing the evening suggested otherwise. "Just a lot of wedding talk and boring family stuff. Plus the portions were huge, so you probably would have felt too full anyway." Their attempts to minimize what I had missed were almost more insulting than honest acknowledgement that I had been excluded from a special family experience. They seemed to need me to believe that staying behind had been better for everyone involved, rather than simply admitting that solving my dress problem had been inconvenient for their plans. My father handed me a small box from the restaurant. "We brought you some dessert," he said with a smile. "The passion fruit cheesecake looked too good to pass up, and we thought you might enjoy it." The gesture was thoughtful, and I appreciated that they had thought of me during their dinner. But receiving leftover dessert while sitting alone in a hotel suite wasn't quite the same as being included in the family celebration that the dessert represented. The fourth day brought a new challenge, when Jessica announced that she wanted to have professional engagement photos taken around the resort. She had researched photographers and found someone who specialized in luxury resort photography, with packages starting at $800 for a 2-hour session. "I really want some beautiful photos to use for our save the dates and maybe our wedding website," she explained as we sat by one of the resort's infinity pools. "Brandon and I will pay for the photographer, but I was hoping the family could help with some of the poses and maybe even get some nice group shots." The plan sounded reasonable until Jessica began outlining her vision for the photo session. She wanted couple shots at various romantic locations around the resort, family portraits with different combinations of relatives, and some casual lifestyle images that captured the luxury vacation experience. "Maya, you could be really helpful with this since you have an artistic eye," she said, apparently forgetting that I was also a family member who might want to be included in the photos rather than just helping to coordinate them. "You could scout locations and maybe help direct some of the poses." Rachel immediately enthusiastically supported the idea, suggesting that I could also help with Jessica's hair and makeup since I was creative and would probably enjoy the behind-the-scenes work. My parents thought it was wonderful that I could contribute to the engagement photos in a meaningful way. Once again, I found myself being positioned as the family helper rather than an equal participant in a family milestone. The assumption seemed to be that being useful was more important than being included, and that I should be grateful for the opportunity to contribute my skills rather than expecting to be featured in the photos myself. The photography session took place during the golden hour before sunset, when the resort's gardens and oceanfront locations looked particularly magical. Jessica and Brandon were a beautiful couple, and the photographer captured their happiness and the stunning Maui scenery with professional skill. But as the session progressed, it became clear that my role was strictly behind the scenes. I helped carry equipment, suggested poses, and made sure Jessica's dress looked perfect in each shot. When family group photos were taken, I was occasionally included but often asked to step aside so the photographer could capture different combinations of relatives. "Let's get some shots of just the parents with the happy couple," the photographer suggested. "And then maybe the sisters together. And then we can do some larger group shots with everyone." When it came time for the sisters' photos, Jessica posed confidently with Rachel, both of them looking sophisticated and successful in their designer resort wear. I was included in a few shots, but I could sense the photographer's struggle to compose images that worked with the dynamic between us. Jessica and Rachel had a natural sister chemistry that came from shared experiences and similar life stages, while I seemed to be the add-on family member who needed to be incorporated carefully. The most telling moment came when the photographer suggested taking some casual lifestyle shots of the family enjoying the resort amenities. Jessica and Brandon were photographed having drinks at the poolside bar, Rachel was captured working on her laptop in a beautiful oceanfront setting, and my parents were shot walking hand in hand along the beach. When it came to my individual shots, the photographer seemed unsure how to position me within the luxury resort narrative. I wasn't part of a couple like Jessica and Brandon. I didn't have the professional success story that Rachel represented, and I wasn't playing the proud parent role like my mother and father. "Maybe we could get some shots of Maya reading by the pool?" the photographer suggested, clearly grasping for a way to include me that fit the resort's aspirational lifestyle marketing. Or perhaps some artistic shots of her sketching the scenery? The suggestion that I should be photographed as the family member who observed and documented rather than fully participated in the luxury experience was the final straw. I had spent 4 days being treated as an afterthought, excluded from activities, relegated to sleeping on couches, and now I was being literally edited into the background of my own family's vacation photos. "Actually, I think I'll skip the individual shots," I said as politely as I could manage. "I have some work to catch up on anyway." Jessica looked relieved, probably thinking that fewer family members in the photos would make for a cleaner narrative focused on her engagement. Rachel seemed distracted by her phone, already reviewing the photos they had taken and planning her social media posts. My parents looked slightly concerned but didn't push the issue. As I walked back toward the presidential suite, I passed other families and couples enjoying the resort's amenities with obvious joy and connection. I saw parents taking silly photos with their adult children, siblings laughing together over tropical drinks, and multi-generational groups that seemed to genuinely enjoy each other's company. The contrast with my own family experience was stark and painful. These other families seemed to operate from a foundation of mutual respect and inclusion, where everyone's presence was valued rather than tolerated. I realized that what I had been experiencing wasn't just about money or accommodations. It was about fundamental assumptions regarding who deserved consideration and who could be overlooked when convenience required it. That evening, as my family reviewed the beautiful engagement photos and made plans for the remaining days of our vacation, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done pretending that their treatment of me was acceptable, done accepting exclusion and dismissal as expressions of family love, and done hiding the truth about who I had become and what I was capable of achieving. The photographer had captured some truly stunning images of my family against the backdrop of the luxury resort I had secretly paid for, but those photos would forever represent the last time they would be able to maintain their illusions about our family dynamic and my place within it. The fifth day would bring the beginning of revelations that would shatter everything they thought they knew about their youngest daughter, and force them to confront the reality of how they had been treating someone who had been quietly supporting their entire vacation experience. As I sat alone on the private balcony that night, listening to my family discuss their photo favorites and plan their final Maui activities, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The time for secrets and hidden generosity was coming to an end, and I was ready for my family to see me clearly for the first time in years. The conversation I was about to have would either bring us closer together through honesty and mutual respect, or it would force us to acknowledge that our family dynamic had been built on assumptions and misconceptions that could no longer be sustained. Either way, I was ready for the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might make everyone involved. The next morning would change everything, though none of us knew it yet. The fifth morning brought an unexpected visitor that would unravel everything. I was sitting on the private balcony with my backup tablet, trying to recover some of my damaged work files, when Leilani approached with a concerned expression and a man in an expensive suit trailing behind her. "Miss Chen, I'm terribly sorry to disturb you," she said nervously. "This is Marcus Rodriguez from our guest relations department. There seems to be some confusion about your reservation that requires immediate attention." Marcus stepped forward with the kind of professional demeanor that suggested serious business. "Miss Chen, we've received notification that there may be an issue with the payment method for your presidential suite reservation. Our billing department needs to verify some information to ensure there are no disruptions to your stay." My heart stopped. I had paid for the entire reservation with my business credit card, the same card that had my real name and business information attached to it. Somehow the hotel's billing system had flagged something that required verification, and now my carefully constructed story about getting a group discount was about to collapse. "What kind of verification?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady while my family continued their breakfast conversation inside the suite, oblivious to the crisis developing on the balcony. Marcus pulled out a tablet and showed me the screen. "According to our records, the reservation was made and paid for by M. Chen Digital Design, with a business address in San Francisco. The credit card authorization shows this as a business expense for a total of $15,247. However, your family has been under the impression that this was booked as a group discount through a hospital connection." The specific amount he mentioned made my stomach drop. That wasn't just the cost of the rooms. It included all the upgrades, the helicopter tour, the spa treatments, and several other experiences I had quietly added to enhance everyone's vacation experience. The total represented weeks of work from my most lucrative clients. Leilani looked uncomfortable delivering this information. "Miss Chen, we pride ourselves on transparency with our guests. If there's been a misunderstanding about the billing arrangements, we need to clarify it immediately. Some of your family members have mentioned concerns about charges appearing on different credit cards." Before I could respond, I heard my father's voice from inside the suite, growing louder as he approached the balcony. "Maya, is everything all right out there? Who are these people?" There was no escape route, no way to handle this conversation privately. Within moments, my entire family had gathered on the balcony, looking concerned and confused, as Marcus and Leilani explained the billing discrepancy. "I don't understand," my mother said, looking between me and the hotel representatives. "Maya arranged a group discount through her work at the hospital. She told us the total cost was much less than the original estimate." Jessica stepped forward with the confidence she brought to all business situations. "Clearly there's been some kind of mistake. My sister doesn't have access to business credit cards or the ability to make reservations of this magnitude. Perhaps you have us confused with another guest." Marcus consulted his tablet again, his professional demeanor remaining intact despite the family tension developing around him. "Ma'am, I have the reservation details right here. The booking was made by Maya Chen, with contact information matching this guest exactly. The business credit card used belongs to M. Chen Digital Design, and the billing address corresponds to a San Francisco residence." Rachel, who had been quiet during the initial explanation, suddenly looked up from her phone with a shocked expression. "Wait, I just Googled M. Chen Digital Design. Maya, is this actually your company?" She turned her phone screen toward the group, showing my business website with my professional portfolio, client testimonials, and contact information. The website featured some of my most successful digital art pieces, including work I had done for recognizable brands and celebrities. The silence that followed was deafening. My family stared at the phone screen, then at me, then back at the screen, trying to process information that completely contradicted everything they thought they knew about my life and financial situation. "Miss Chen," Marcus continued gently, "would you prefer to handle the billing verification privately, or shall we continue with your family present?" I realized that this moment had been inevitable from the beginning. All my attempts to maintain secrecy while generously providing for my family had led to this confrontation where the truth would emerge in the most uncomfortable way possible. "No, it's fine," I said, my voice sounding stronger than I felt. "Yes, I made the reservation. Yes, I paid for everything. M. Chen Digital Design is my business, and this entire vacation was my gift to the family." My father's face went through a series of expressions, starting with confusion and moving through disbelief toward something that looked like betrayal. Maya, what are you talking about? You're a graduate student. You work part-time at a hospital. You live in a tiny apartment, and we help you with expenses. No, Dad, I replied, feeling both liberation and terror at finally speaking the truth. I'm a successful digital artist who has been building a business for the past 2 years. I live in a small apartment by choice, not necessity. And I haven't needed your financial help for longer than you realize. Jessica grabbed Rachel's phone and began scrolling through my website with increasing amazement. These portfolio pieces. Maya, some of these are for major brands. This artwork for the meditation app, this campaign for the wellness company. How is this possible? Brandon, who had remained silent during most family interactions, suddenly looked at me with new interest. Maya Chen Digital Design. I've actually heard of your work. You did the visual identity for that startup that went viral last year, didn't you? That campaign was everywhere. The acknowledgement from Brandon, someone who had previously dismissed me as Jessica's artistic little sister, felt surreal. But it also highlighted how dramatically the family dynamic was shifting as the truth emerged. Marcus, sensing that the family needed time to process this information, stepped forward diplomatically. Miss Chen, would you like us to provide detailed billing statements so your family can understand the full scope of the reservation? Yes, I said, surprising myself with my decisiveness. I think it's time for complete transparency. As Marcus and Leilani retreated to gather the detailed billing information, my family stood in stunned silence on the balcony. The view that had served as a backdrop for 5 days of family tension now seemed to frame a conversation that would redefine everything between us. Maya, my mother said slowly, why didn't you tell us? Why let us think you were struggling financially when you were obviously doing well enough to pay for all of this? The hurt in her voice was genuine, and I realized that my secrecy had wounded her in ways I hadn't anticipated. But I also felt years of accumulated frustration rising to the surface. Because this is exactly how you've treated me for the past 5 days, I said, gesturing around the luxury resort. Even when you thought I had somehow managed to get us this amazing deal, you still made me sleep on the couch, excluded me from dinners, and treated me like the family member who should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention and accommodation you could spare. Rachel looked uncomfortable, apparently realizing for the first time how their behavior must have appeared from my perspective. Maya, we didn't mean it like that. We were just trying to be practical about sleeping arrangements and expenses. Practical for whom? I asked. I paid for the sapach, presidential suite specifically so everyone would have comfortable accommodations. But somehow I ended up on the couch while Jessica's wedding dress got the bed. Jessica's face flushed red. You never said anything about the sleeping arrangements. If you had a problem with it, you should have spoken up. When? I replied. When you immediately claimed the private suite? When Mom suggested I'd be comfortable on the couch because I was used to small spaces? When everyone automatically assumed I needed financial help with every activity? My father, who had been processing the information in silence, finally spoke up. Maya, if you could afford to pay for this entire vacation, why did you lie about the group discount? Why not just offer to treat the family openly? His question cut to the heart of the matter, and I took a deep breath before answering. Because I wanted to see how you would treat me when you thought I was powerless to change my circumstances. I wanted to know if your love and respect were conditional on my financial success. The words hung in the air between us, carrying implications that none of us were fully prepared to address. Marcus returned at that moment with a folder of documents, providing a temporary reprieve from the emotional intensity. Miss Chen, here are the detailed billing statements for your review, he said, handing me the folder. As you can see, the total includes the presidential suite, 2 oceanfront suites, the helicopter tour, spa treatments, restaurant reservations, and several other amenities you added to enhance your family's experience. I opened the folder and reviewed the charges, seeing the full financial scope of my generosity laid out in black and white. Then I handed the documents to my father, watching his expression change as he absorbed the reality of what I had provided. $15,000, he said quietly. Maya, this is more than some people make in months. You spent this on a family vacation and then let us treat you like a charity case. I spent it because I love you, I replied. I wanted to give Jessica the perfect engagement celebration, and I wanted our family to have an amazing shared experience. But I also wanted to understand why I always felt like an outsider, even during family events. Brandon, who had been studying my website on Rachel's phone, looked up with obvious respect. Maya, your client roster is impressive. You're working with some major brands. Why keep this secret from your family? His question was practical rather than emotional, and it helped ground the conversation in concrete realities rather than hurt feelings. Initially, I wasn't sure if the success would continue, I explained. I wanted to prove to myself that I could sustain the business before making any announcements. But as time went on, I realized that your treatment of me revealed something important about our family dynamic. Jessica, who had been unusually quiet during the revelations, finally spoke up. Maya, I need to apologize. Looking back at this week, I can see how we treated you, and it wasn't okay. Success or no success, you deserved better from us. Her acknowledgement meant more than I had expected, but it also raised questions about how we would move forward from this point. The thing is, I continued, this pattern isn't new. It's been happening for years, in smaller ways. Every family gathering, every holiday, every celebration. I was always the one whose needs came last, whose opinions mattered least, whose presence was tolerated rather than valued. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Maya, we never meant to make you feel that way. We were trying to protect you, to help you build stability before taking big risks. But you never asked what I actually needed, I replied gently. You decided what kind of person I was and what kind of life I should want, without ever really seeing who I had become. The conversation was interrupted by Leilani, who approached with another resort staff member I hadn't met before. Miss Chen, she said apologetically, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's been another development. We've received a complaint from some other guests about noise from your suite, and when our security team investigated, they discovered some concerning behavior. The new staff member, who introduced himself as the head of resort security, explained that my family's late-night conversations on the balcony had been overheard by guests in adjacent suites. Apparently, some of their discussions about my financial situation and the billing confusion had been loud enough to disturb other visitors. More importantly, he continued, we've had reports that some members of your party have been questioning our staff about billing procedures and attempting to verify charges that weren't theirs to verify. This kind of behavior raises concerns about potential credit card fraud. My stomach dropped as I realized the implications of what he was saying. My family's confusion about the billing situation had led them to make inquiries that looked suspicious to resort security. Wait, Rachel said, looking alarmed. We weren't trying to commit fraud, we were just confused about who had paid for what. The security manager nodded diplomatically. I understand there may have been family miscommunications. However, we need to clarify the billing situation officially to ensure there are no irregularities. As the resort staff worked to resolve the security concerns, my family and I found ourselves forced to continue our conversation under official scrutiny. The weight of the situation seemed to finally drive home the seriousness of what had transpired during our vacation. Over the next several hours, as we worked through the billing verification process and addressed the resort's concerns, my family began to truly absorb the reality of our situation. I was not the struggling younger sister they had been protecting and managing for years. I was a successful professional who had been quietly subsidizing their lifestyle and experiences, while enduring their condescension and dismissal. By the end of the day, as we sat together in the presidential suite I had provided, the dynamic between us had shifted fundamentally. Jessica and Rachel looked at me with a mixture of respect and guilt. My parents seemed to be reevaluating years of assumptions about my capabilities and needs. Brandon treated me as a business equal for the first time since meeting me. But the changes went deeper than just acknowledgement of my financial success. The revelation had forced all of us to confront uncomfortable truths about how we related to each other, and what our family relationships were actually based on. Maya, my father said as evening approached, I need to ask you something directly. Can you forgive us for how we've treated you? Not just this week, but over the years? His question was simple but loaded with implications about whether our family could rebuild from this foundation of honesty, or whether the damage was too significant to repair. I don't know yet, I answered truthfully. I love you all and I always will. But I need to see that you can genuinely respect me as an adult and an equal, not just because you now know I'm financially successful. The remaining 2 days of our vacation unfolded differently than any of us had expected. My family made genuine efforts to include me as an equal participant in activities and decisions. They asked about my business, my goals, and my experiences with curiosity rather than condescension. They treated my opinions and preferences with the same consideration they showed each other. But we all understood that real change would need to happen gradually, through consistent actions rather than dramatic gestures. The patterns that had developed over years wouldn't disappear overnight just because of one honest conversation. On our final morning at the resort, as we packed our belongings and prepared to return to our regular lives, Jessica approached me privately. Maya, I want you to know that this experience has changed how I see our family and how I see you, she said. I hope you'll give us the chance to do better going forward. Her words were sincere, and I appreciated her willingness to acknowledge the problems in our dynamic. But I also knew that rebuilding trust would require sustained effort from everyone involved. As our plane lifted off from Maui, carrying us back to California and our regular routines, I reflected on what had been accomplished during our week together. The truth was finally out, the family's secrets had been revealed, and we all had a clearer understanding of our relationships and dynamics. But most importantly, I had learned that I didn't need to hide my success or diminish myself to maintain family relationships. The people who truly loved me would respect and celebrate my achievements, while those who couldn't accept my success weren't providing the kind of love I needed anyway. The vacation that had started as a celebration of Jessica's engagement had become something entirely different, a revelation about family, respect, and the courage required to demand the treatment you deserve from the people who claim to love you most. 6 months later, our family relationships had evolved in ways I couldn't have predicted. My parents had become genuinely interested in my business and proud of my achievements. Jessica had asked me to create custom artwork for her wedding, recognizing my professional skills rather than just seeing me as her artistic little sister. Rachel and I had developed a real friendship based on mutual respect, rather than her assumption that she needed to mentor me. But perhaps most importantly, I had learned to value myself enough to speak up when I wasn't being treated with respect, regardless of the family dynamics or expectations involved. The girl who had slept silently on a couch while her family enjoyed accommodations she had provided was gone, replaced by a woman who understood her own worth and wasn't afraid to insist that others recognize it too. The Grand Wailea Resort still sent me promotional emails, probably hoping I would book another family vacation. But I had learned that the most important journey wasn't to a luxury destination. It was to a place of honest communication and mutual respect with the people who mattered most in my life. Sometimes the most expensive gift you can give your family isn't a luxury vacation or expensive accommodations. Sometimes it's the truth about who you really are and the courage to demand that they see you clearly, even when it's uncomfortable for everyone involved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.